The air tasted of burnt sugar and hot metal. Alara, Ellie Vance breathed it in through her mouth, the acrid smoke stinging the back of her throat. Twisted aluminum, once the sleek fuselage of a news helicopter, lay strewn across the westbound lanes of the I-10 like a giant's discarded toy. The late afternoon Arizona sun beat down, making the asphalt shimmer and the smell of spilled jet fuel an almost physical presence. Her own sweat trickled down her temples, carving clean paths through the grime already dusting her face. "Pressure's dropping, 80 over 50, her partner Dave yelled over the dying whine of the turbines. "He's in VTAC." Ellie didn't need to look at the monitor. She could see it in the pilot's eyes, the way his pupils had started to dilate, the waxy gray pallor of his skin. He was a man in his 40s, his uniform soaked in a crimson that was far too dark, far too plentiful. A shard of his own cockpit console had speared through his thigh, severing the femoral artery. A tourniquet was already in place, cranked as tight as it would go, but the damage was done. He'd lost too much. "Bag of Oneg now," Ellie commanded, her voice a clipped, authoritative bark that cut through the chaos. Dave's face, usually a mask of calm professionalism, was tight with worry. "That was the last one. We used it on the passenger." The word hung in the superheated air of the ambulance bay. Last one. Dr. Morrison, the on-scene supervisor from the local hospital who had arrived just after them, pushed his way forward. He was a man built for sterile hallways and controlled environments, and the roadside carnage had him flustered. He glanced at the pilot, then at the empty blood cooler. He shook his head, a gesture of grim finality. "Medevac is still 7 minutes out. He doesn't have 2, Morrison stated, his voice flat with the practiced detachment of a doctor delivering bad news. "There's nothing more we can do for him here. Prep him for transport and hope for the best." Hope for the best. A death sentence. Ellie looked at the pilot, at the faint tremor in his hand, at the wedding band glinting in the Sunday. She saw a life slipping away, a story about to be cut short, all because of a logistical failure. A bag of blood. "No," Ellie said. The word was quiet but absolute. Morrison turned to her, his eyebrows raised. "Excuse me, Vance? There's no. We are out of options." "I'm O negative," she said, already reaching for the IV starter kit. Her mind was racing, flipping through textbooks and training manuals, landing on a page that was mostly theoretical, a last-ditch, battlefield-style procedure. A direct transfusion, dangerous, reckless. And the only shot this man had. "Absolutely not," Morrison snapped, his voice rising in disbelief. "This is a catastrophic breach of protocol, Vance. You could be contaminated, you could cause an air embolism. We are not a battlefield MASH unit." Ellie met his gaze, her own eyes blazing with an intensity that made the older doctor take an involuntary step back. "He'll be dead in 3 minutes. What's your protocol for that?" She didn't wait for an answer. Her hands moved with a fluid, practiced efficiency that was mesmerizing to watch. She ripped open a 16-gauge needle for the pilot and another for herself. Dave, after a moment of stunned hesitation, saw the resolve in her eyes and moved to help, his loyalty to her overriding his fear of the doctor's wrath. "Get me a pressure bag and another line," she ordered. "I need to set up a parallel circuit." "Ilara, I am ordering you to stop this," Morrison warned, his face reddening. "I will have your certification for this. This is insane." "Then have it," she shot back, not looking up from her work. She expertly slid the catheter into her own vein, taping it down with a practiced flick of her wrist. The plastic felt cold against her skin. She saw her own blood, dark and rich, begin to fill the tube. Her life, flowing out to save his. It felt strangely right. She connected the line to the pilot's IV access. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The man on the gurney gave a final, shuddering gasp. Then, the monitor beside him, which had been screeching a flatline tone, suddenly chirped. A beat. Then another. A ragged, unstable rhythm, but a rhythm nonetheless. "Sinus bradycardia," Dave breathed, his voice filled with awe. "His pressure is coming up, 90 over 60. Ellie leaned against the side of the ambulance, a wave of dizziness washing over her as her own blood volume dropped. She felt cold despite the blistering heat. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear the distant thump-thump-thump of the incoming medevac helicopter. Captain Miller, the pilot, was stabilized. He was alive. As the flight crew loaded him onto their chopper, one of the medics gave Ellie a stunned, respectful nod. "Doctor," Morrison just stared at her, his mouth agape, a mixture of fury and disbelief on his face. Later that evening, she received the official, scathing reprimand from her service chief. It was placed in her permanent file, a black mark on a perfect record. She didn't care. She got home late, the smell of smoke still clinging to her uniform. She showered, letting the hot water wash away the blood and grime of the day. She moved quietly through her small house, checking the locks before pushing open the door to her brother's room. Liam was asleep, his breathing a soft, rhythmic whisper in the quiet room. A tangle of tubes ran from an IV pole to a port in his chest, a constant, clinical reminder of the cystic fibrosis that was waging a slow, relentless war against his lungs. His medical bills were a mountain she could never seem to summit. She looked at his pale, peaceful face and felt the familiar ache in her chest, a mix of fierce love and gnawing fear. She saved a stranger's life today by breaking the rules. For Liam, she would burn the whole world down. Leaning down, she brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead, her exhaustion a heavy blanket. She had made the right call. She was sure of it. The next day was a forced island of normalcy, in a sea of lingering adrenaline. The shrill ring of the phone dragged Ellie from a restless, dream-haunted sleep. It was Liam's pulmonologist, Dr. Sleems Enrique Evans, calling with the results of his latest culture. "It's a persistent strain of Pseudomonas, Ilara." The doctor's voice was gentle but firm. "The oral antibiotics aren't touching it. I want to admit him and start him on a course of intravenous tobramycin. A strong one." Ellie's stomach clenched. An admission meant time off work she couldn't afford. It meant astronomical hospital bills her insurance would only partially cover. "Okay, when?" "Tomorrow morning, if possible. The sooner we get ahead of this, the better." "Okay, doctor, we'll be there." She hung up, the weight of the world settling back onto her shoulders. She looked at the pile of bills on her kitchen counter, a paper monument to her constant struggle. One in particular, a final notice from the mortgage company, seemed to mock her. She'd saved a life yesterday, but she felt like she was drowning in her own. Liam was in the living room, engrossed in a video game, a thin blanket draped over his lap despite the warmth of the day. He looked over at her, his eyes, so much like her own, filled with a perceptive intelligence that always unnerved her. "Hospital again?" She forced a smile. "Just for a little tune-up. You know the drill." He nodded, turning back to his game, but she saw the slight slump in his shoulders. He was brave, braver than anyone she knew, but he was tired of the fight, and she was tired of watching him have to fight it. It was just after noon when she saw them. At first, it was just one black SUV, a Ford Expedition with tinted windows so dark they looked like polished obsidian. It pulled up to the curb opposite her house and stopped, its engine a low, menacing hum. Then a second one appeared behind it, followed by a third. They were silent, imposing, utterly out of place in her quiet, cookie-cutter suburban neighborhood. Curtains twitched in the houses next door. Mrs. Gable's prize-winning poodle started a frantic, yapping tirade. Ellie's paramedic instincts kicked in, a cold spike of alarm. She thought it was a federal raid, a drug bust on the wrong house. She moved Liam away from the front window, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then, the passenger door of the lead vehicle opened. A man in a full military dress uniform emerged. He was tall, ramrod straight, with silver hair cropped close to his scalp and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. Medals and ribbons adorned his chest, a vibrant splash of color against the dark green fabric. He moved with an unnerving economy of motion, adjusting his jacket before striding directly towards her front door. He was flanked by two aides, a man and a woman, both with the same severe expressions and watchful eyes. The knock on her door wasn't loud, but it resonated with an undeniable authority. 3 precise raps. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her t-shirt, and opened the door. "Ilara Vance?" the man asked. His voice was a deep, calm baritone. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Can I help you?" "I am General Marcus Thorne, United States Army," he said, his eyes a piercing shade of blue. "May I have a moment of your time?" Stunned into silence, she simply nodded and stepped aside, letting him and his aides into her small foyer. They seemed to take up all the air in the room. "I'm here about yesterday's incident on the I-10, General Thorne began, his gaze sweeping over her modest living room before landing back on her. "On behalf of a grateful nation, I want to thank you for your actions. Your unconventional heroism saved the life of a valuable asset." One of his aides stepped forward and presented her with a handsome wooden plaque. Engraved on a brass plate was a formal commendation from the Department of Defense, recognizing her for Extraordinary life-saving measures under extreme duress. Ellie stared at the plaque, bewildered. A valuable asset? I thought he was a news pilot. A flicker of something unreadable passed through the general's eyes. Captain Miller holds a civilian press credential, but his primary role is with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. He's one of our best. What you did yesterday was more important than you can imagine. The praise felt hollow, the commendation heavy and strange in her hands. There was an undercurrent to his words, a tightly coiled tension in the room that set every nerve on edge. I was just doing my job, she said, the words sounding weak even to her own ears. You did more than that, General Thorne's voice lowered, becoming more serious. The mask of polite gratitude fell away, replaced by an intense clinical focus. Captain Miller's recovery, miss? Vance has been medically impossible. His femoral artery, which was shredded, has completely regenerated. Lacerations that should have taken weeks to heal are already closing. There are anomalous regenerative markers flooding his system, markers we've never seen before. Our medical teams traced their origin point. He paused, letting the weight of his next words land. They came from your blood. Ellie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. My blood? That's not possible. And yet it is happening, he said, his voice flat and final. Which is why I am here. This is now a matter of national security. I need you to come with us. We have a secure medical facility where we can run some tests, perform a precautionary observation. The carefully chosen words need, precautionary observation, did little to conceal the nature of the order. Her mind reeled. A secure facility? National security? It sounded like something out of a movie. Her first thought was of Liam. I can't. My brother, he's sick. He has to be admitted to the hospital tomorrow morning. He needs me. General Thorne gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if he had anticipated this very objection. We are aware of Liam's condition. Don't worry, Miss Vance. The words were meant to be reassuring, but they landed like a punch to the gut. They knew about Liam. Of course they did. We've already made arrangements for him to receive the finest care at one of our facilities. Walter Reed, in fact. He's in good hands. The room seemed to tilt. They had already made arrangements. The calm, paternalistic tone was the most terrifying thing she had ever heard. It was the sound of her life, her choices, being systematically taken away from her. This wasn't a request. She looked past the general, through her own front door, and saw a fourth vehicle pull up, a medical transport van. Her compliance was not optional. It never had been. The facility was a place that didn't officially exist. After a short, silent helicopter ride, Ellie was led through a series of blast doors into a world of brushed steel, polished concrete, and the constant, sterile hum of advanced air filtration. There were no windows. The light was a flat, shadowless white that emanated from recessed panels in the ceiling, making it impossible to tell if it was day or night. It was a place designed to erase the outside world, a gilded cage buried deep beneath the earth. She was assigned a room that was more like a high-end hospital suite than a cell. Comfortable bed, private bathroom, a closet with neatly folded gray sweatsuits and scrubs. But the door had no handle on the inside, only a biometric scanner on the outside, and a small, shatterproof window looked out not onto a hallway, but into a brightly lit laboratory. She was a specimen in a terrarium. The architect of her new reality introduced himself the next morning. I am Dr. Eris Thorne, he said, entering her room without knocking. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his late 30s, with sharp, intelligent features that were a crueler, more arrogant version of his father's. He wore a pristine white lab coat and carried a datapad, which he consulted more often than he looked at her. I'm the lead researcher on Project Prometheus, he continued, his tone clinical and completely devoid of warmth. You will be my primary subject of study for the foreseeable future. Please, sit. Ellie remained standing. Where is my brother? I want to talk to him. Eris Thorne barely glanced up from his tablet. Your brother has been comfortably installed at our pediatric wing. He is receiving unparalleled care. His access to you, however, is contingent on your full cooperation. He finally looked at her, his eyes cold and appraising. So, I suggest you cooperate. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous, dehumanizing cycle of tests. Every morning started with a blood draw, not just a vial, but bags of it. They subjected her to MRIs, CT scans, tissue biopsies that left her aching and bruised. They exposed her to pathogens under controlled conditions, watching in fascination as her immune system mounted a response of impossible speed and efficiency. She was poked, prodded, scanned, and sampled until she felt less like a person and more like a collection of biological data. Dr. Thorne was a constant, unnerving presence. He observed the procedures from behind glass or stood in the room, dictating notes into his tablet with a chilling detachment. He seemed to view her humanity as an inconvenient variable. Subject exhibits elevated heart rate and cortisol levels in response to the biopsy needle, he would dictate, as if she weren't even there. Pain response appears standard, despite the accelerated tissue regeneration we observed in the last trial. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling session where they had taken a painful bone marrow sample from her hip, she lashed out. "I'm not a subject. My name is Alara. I'm a person, and you are hurting me." Eris looked at her, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. "Your subjective experience is, frankly, the least interesting thing about you, Miss Vance. Your genetic code, the unique protein cascade in your blood, that is fascinating. The pain is a temporary and irrelevant byproduct of data collection." Her isolation was absolute. Her one request to make a phone call was granted, but it was a calculated act of cruelty. They put the call on speakerphone in a lab, with both Thorns present. "Ellie, is that you?" Liam's voice, small and tinny, was a lifeline. "Liam, hi buddy, how are you? Are they treating you okay?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It's weird here," he said. "The doctors are nice, I guess, but they won't tell me where you are. They said you're on a special project. Are you coming home soon?" General Thorne stepped forward. "That's enough." He signaled for the call to be cut. The line went dead. Ellie stared at the phone, her heart a block of ice in her chest. "Why would you do that?" "To remind you of the stakes," the general said calmly. "Liam's continued top-tier care, his access to experimental treatments that could radically improve his condition, is entirely dependent on our work here. And our work here is entirely dependent on you. Cooperate, and you are securing his future. Be difficult, and resources can be reallocated." It was the most brutally effective threat she could imagine. They had her brother, and they were using his life, his health, as a leash. The rage it inspired in her was a pure, white-hot thing, but it was impotent. She was trapped. The only small crack in the monolithic wall of her confinement was a guard assigned to her room. He was a local cop, a man in his 50s named Peterson, subcontracted for perimeter security. He had kind, tired eyes and looked deeply uncomfortable with his assignment. He wasn't allowed to speak to her, but sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, he would give her a small, sympathetic nod. One night, unable to sleep under the perpetual white light, she stood at the small window in her door, watching him. She pressed her hand to the glass. "Please," she mouthed, the words soundless. "You have to help me." Peterson saw her. He looked down the empty corridor, then back at her. He shook his head slowly, his expression one of genuine regret. He mouthed back, "I can't, I'm sorry." He looked away, unable to meet her gaze any longer. This small interaction was more devastating than any of Thorne's threats. It confirmed her utter powerlessness. The entire system, from the general at the top to the cop at the bottom, was aligned against her. Weeks turned into a month. She grew weaker from the constant blood draws, paler. But her body kept fighting back, regenerating, healing. She was a living miracle, and it was her own private hell. The hope she had clung to in the first few days began to curdle into a grim, resigned despair. Then came the day she finally broke. Eris Thorne entered her room with a new set of consent forms. "We've had a breakthrough in synthesizing the primary regenerative enzyme," he announced, a rare spark of genuine excitement in his voice. "But we need a larger tissue sample to stabilize it, a much larger one. We'll be performing a liver resection, will only take about 20%. Based on our projections, it should grow back in 72 hours. He was talking about cutting a piece of her liver out, as if he were talking about pruning a plant. "No," Ellie whispered, the word raw. "This isn't a request," Eris said, his patience wearing thin. "No." This time, her voice was stronger. She stood up, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "You will not cut me open. You will not take any more pieces of me. I refuse." Eris sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of annoyance. "You are not in a position to refuse." "Watch me," she snarled. He simply tapped his tablet. A few minutes later, a woman in a sharp suit with the cold, dead eyes of a shark entered the room. She was a military lawyer. "Miss Vance," the lawyer began, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "When you accepted the Department of Defense commendation from General Thorne in your home, you consented to a debriefing. Per the National Security Act of 2004, Addendum 7A, any biological anomalies discovered during a debriefing with a civilian who has assisted a special operations asset are subject to temporary government oversight. By entering this facility, you triggered that clause. You are, for legal purposes, a temporary government asset. You have no right to refuse medical procedures deemed essential to national security. If you continue to be uncooperative, you can and will be sedated, and the procedure will be performed anyway." The lawyer placed a pen on top of the forms. "Signing this is merely a formality. Your consent is irrelevant. The trap wasn't just sprung. It was absolute. They had used a commendation, an act of supposed gratitude, to legally strip her of her personhood." She looked from the lawyer's merciless face to Dr. Thorne's smug, triumphant smile. The despair that had been hollowing her out for weeks finally burned away, leaving behind something new. Something hard and sharp and dangerous. Rage. The liver resection was the violation that changed everything. They sedated her, just as they'd threatened, and when she woke up, a dull, throbbing pain radiated from her right side, a physical manifestation of her powerlessness. But as the anesthesia wore off, the despair was replaced by a cold, clarifying anger. They had pushed her past the point of fear. They had made a grave mistake. They had shown her there was nothing left to lose. Her feigned compliance became her armor. She stopped arguing, stopped pleading. She drank the nutritional supplements they gave her, submitted to the blood draws without flinching, and answered Dr. Thorne's questions with a detached monotone. Her passivity was a mask, hiding a mind that was now whirring with frantic, focused energy. She was a paramedic. Her entire career was built on assessing a scene, identifying threats, and executing a plan under pressure. This facility was now her scene. The Thornes were her threat, and escape was the only viable treatment plan. Her first break came from an unexpected source. One of the night nurses, a young woman named Maria, was different from the others. She never met Ellie's eyes, but her touch was gentle when she changed an IV or checked her vitals. One night, while taking Ellie's blood pressure, Maria leaned in close, pretending to adjust the cuff. "They're lying to you about your brother," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the beep of the monitor. "He's not at Walter Reed. He's here, on the sublevel pediatric wing. They're using him as a guinea pig for the first stable derivative they synthesized from your blood." The world tilted on its axis. Ellie felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't just leverage. They were actively experimenting on her sick brother. The thought was so monstrous it almost buckled her knees. Maria saw the look on her face and squeezed her arm. "They told him it's a new miracle cure. He doesn't know. I have to go." She pulled away, her face a mask of professional neutrality once more. But before leaving, she purposefully left a datapad on the bedside table. "Oops, Dr. Thorne will be wanting this back." The moment the door sealed behind her, Ellie snatched the tablet. It was unlocked. Maria had taken an immense risk. Ellie wouldn't waste it. Her fingers flew across the screen, her medical knowledge allowing her to navigate the complex files with ease. She bypassed patient charts and went straight for project outlines, internal memos, security schematics. It was all there. Project Prometheus. The stated goal was to create a universal healing agent, a panacea for the modern battlefield. The memos between General Thorne and his superiors spoke of a new era of warfare, of soldiers who could be wounded and return to the fight in hours, of an insurmountable military advantage. They spoke of her not as Alara Vance, but as the Source. Then she found the file that made her blood run cold. It was a video log. She pressed play, and the face of Captain Miller, the helicopter pilot she had saved, filled the screen. He was healthy, vibrant, and dressed in a military flight suit. He was seated in a briefing room, speaking to what must have been a panel of officials. "The effects of the Source's blood were instantaneous," Miller said, his voice filled with a convert's zeal. "My recovery wasn't just fast, it was total. This technology will redefine the concepts of casualty and recovery. The asset's sacrifice is a small price to pay for the security this will provide our nation. It is her patriotic duty to contribute." The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. The man whose life she had saved, the man for whom she had sacrificed her career and now her freedom, was advocating for her continued imprisonment. He had been bought or brainwashed into becoming a mouthpiece for her captors. He was no longer a person she had saved, he was part of the cage. That was the final piece. There were no allies coming for her. No one on the outside even knew she was gone. The system hadn't just captured her, it had absorbed everyone connected to her. If she was going to get out, if she was going to save Liam, she would have to do it alone. She wiped the tears from her eyes. The time for emotion was over. She memorized the facility schematics, noting ventilation shafts, power conduits, and security station locations. She studied the shift change schedules for the guards. Her mind, once consumed with fear and despair, was now a razor-sharp instrument of strategy. She was a paramedic. She knew how the human body worked. She knew how to create the symptoms of a crisis. She knew how to exploit the panic that followed. She knew what was on a standard crash cart, every drug and every piece of equipment. And she knew how they could be used for purposes other than saving a life. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of the datapad. The woman looking back was pale and thin, with dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze was steady, hard, and utterly resolved. The specimen was done being studied. It was time to break the glass. The plan began with a single, controlled convulsion. Ellie waited until the mid-afternoon lull, a time she'd noted when the lab was minimally staffed during a shift change. She stood in the center of her room, took a deep breath, and then expertly faked the onset of a grand mal seizure. Her paramedic training had included recognizing and responding to every type of medical emergency. Faking one was simply a matter of reverse engineering. She dropped to the floor, careful to protect her head, and let her body thrash, her limbs jerking in a violent, uncontrolled rhythm she'd seen 100 times. She bit the inside of her cheek, hard enough to draw blood, letting it foam at her lips to complete the terrifying picture. The alarm on her biometric monitor shrieked. Within seconds, the door to her room slid open, and 2 medical technicians rushed in, their faces etched with panic. "Doctor!" Eris Thorne was right behind them, his usual arrogance momentarily replaced by alarm. The source was having a seizure, an unforeseen complication, an unacceptable risk to the project. "Get the crash cart," he barked. "Push 5 milligrams of Ativan now. Get her on her side before she aspirates." This was the chaos she had counted on. In a medical crisis, protocols loosen. People focus on the patient, not their surroundings. The technicians worked frantically over her, one trying to hold her still while the other prepped an injection. As they rolled her onto her side, her flailing arm accidentally knocked a tray of medical supplies to the floor. Syringes and vials scattered across the white linoleum. "Damn it, be careful," Eris snapped. In that single, chaotic moment, as all eyes were on the mess, Ellie's hand shot out and palmed a small, discarded item from the floor. The plastic cap from a large bore needle. It was small, insignificant, and exactly what she needed. The technician injected the Ativan into her IV line. Ellie had to fight the sedative's pull, allowing her convulsions to subside in a way that seemed consistent with the drug-taking effect. She let her body go limp, her breathing deep and even. "She's postictal," one of the techs said with relief. "Vitals are stabilizing." Eris Thorne knelt beside her, his frustration palpable. "What the hell caused this? Run a full tox screen and a metabolic panel. I want to know what happened." As he leaned over her, his access card, clipped to the lapel of his lab coat, dangled just inches from her face. While the technicians were cleaning up, Ellie's hand, hidden from Eris's line of sight, moved with painstaking slowness. She used the edge of the hard plastic cap she'd stolen to snag the lanyard of the keycard, pulling it silently from its clip. She tucked it into the palm of her hand, her muscles screaming from the tension. "Let's move her to the main med, bay for observation," Eris commanded, standing up. "I don't want her out of my sight." They loaded her onto a gurney. This was her one chance. As they wheeled her out of the room, she kept her eyes closed, feigning deep unconsciousness. They passed Peterson, the security guard, who looked at her with pity. As they moved down the main corridor, she executed Phase 2. With her hidden hand, she reached under the gurney and found the release valve for the oxygen tank. She twisted it. The tank began to hiss, venting colorless, odorless, and highly flammable gas into the hallway. Next, she needed a spark. On the crash cart, pushed alongside her gurney, was the defibrillator. As they passed a wall-mounted hand sanitizing station, she opened her eyes just enough to see her target. Her arm shot out, ripping one of the defibrillator paddles from its holster. She slammed it against the metal dispenser. The resulting explosion was more concussive than fiery, a loud whoomph as the oxygen-rich air ignited. It was enough. The emergency sprinklers activated, raining down water. Alarms blared, red lights strobed, and the hallway filled with smoke and panicked shouting. The technicians dropped the gurney and ran for cover. Ellie rolled onto the floor, the keycard clutched in her hand. The Ativan made her limbs feel like lead, but adrenaline was a powerful antidote. She scrambled to her feet and ran, swiping the card at the first sealed door she reached. It slid open. She was in a service corridor, darker and grittier than the pristine labs. She could hear boots pounding on the floor behind her, shouts of, "She's here! Seal the corridor!" She ran, her heart hammering, following the schematics burned into her memory. Down one level, through a locker room, and into a storage area filled with chemical reagents. The door slammed shut behind her, and she heard the lock engage. A trap. The door in front of her hissed open, and Dr. Eris Thorne stood there, a security guard flanking him. Eris held a syringe filled with a clear liquid, a powerful sedative, no doubt. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Did you really think you could get away, Miss Vance?" he sneered. "Your little paramedic tricks are amusing, but this is my world. It's over." The guard advanced. Ellie backed away, her eyes darting around the storeroom. She saw two large containers on a shelf, one sodium hypochlorite, the other acetic acid, bleach and vinegar, basic cleaning supplies. When mixed, they create chlorine gas. "Stay back!" she yelled, grabbing both containers. "Don't be ridiculous," Eris said, gesturing for the guard to grab her. As the guard lunged, Ellie uncapped the jugs and poured them together into a large basin on the floor. A thick, greenish-yellow gas immediately began to billow upwards, the smell acrid and suffocating. The guard choked, clutching his throat as his lungs burned. Eris stared in horror, recognizing the immediate danger. "You maniac!" he gasped, stumbling backward. Ellie held her breath, her own lungs beginning to ache. She grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and discharged it directly at Eris. The cloud of CO2 knocked him off his feet, and he hit the ground, stunned. The syringe flew from his hand. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the syringe, ran over to the gasping doctor, and plunged it into his thigh, depressing the plunger. "How's that for a subjective experience, doctor?" she whispered, her voice a ragged gasp. She swiped his keycard. It had higher clearance and burst through the door, sealing it behind her, trapping him and the incapacitated guard in the noxious room. She knew the gas would dissipate quickly once the ventilation system kicked in, but it had bought her precious minutes. She raced for the sublevel parking garage, the final checkpoint. As the heavy steel door slid open, she was met not by guards, but by the imposing figure of General Marcus Thorne. He stood alone, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression one of profound disappointment. "This is a foolish, selfish act, Alara," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. Think of the lives you could save, the soldiers, the civilians, the wars you could prevent. Your brother will be a hero's family. Don't throw that away. Ellie stopped, breathing heavily, her body screaming with exhaustion and pain. She looked at the man who had stolen her life, who was torturing her brother, and felt nothing but contempt. "You don't want to save lives," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You want to build better soldiers so you can fight bigger wars. You want to own a miracle, not share one. You took my life, you threatened my brother, and you called it patriotism. My only duty is to him." Sirens wailed from the floors above. The entire facility was on high alert. The general took a step towards her. "Don't make me order them to shoot," but Ellie had seen her exit. A non-armored transport van, the kind used for laundry services, was parked near the ramp, its keys dangling from the ignition, a lazy oversight. She broke into a sprint, diving into the driver's seat. The general shouted orders, but it was too late. She slammed the van into gear, the tires screeching as she floored the accelerator. She smashed through the flimsy security gate at the top of the ramp and burst out into the cool night air. For the first time in months, she saw the moon. She was bruised, bleeding, and hunted, but she was free. Freedom tasted like cheap coffee and stale gasoline. 3 days after her escape, Ellie sat in a dingy motel room 2 states away from the subterranean prison that had been her world. The garish neon sign outside cast a flickering red glow across the peeling wallpaper. She had paid for the room in cash, using the last of the emergency money she'd managed to grab from her house in the brief, frantic minutes before she'd hit the road. Her hair, once a familiar brown, was now a choppy, chemical blonde, dyed in the bathroom of a gas station. She was a ghost, a name on a most wanted list that no one but its creators would ever see. Her body ached. The incision from the liver resection was a constant, angry reminder of what they had taken from her. But every throb of pain was a confirmation that she was alive and, for the moment, in control of her own body. The exhaustion was bone deep, but it was overshadowed by a singular, burning purpose that kept her moving, kept her thinking, kept her fighting. Liam. She looked at the package on the lumpy motel bed. It contained her declaration of war. Inside a padded envelope was a small, sealed vial containing a sample of her own blood, drawn with a stolen medical kit. Alongside it was a disposable thumb drive. On it, she had written everything she could remember: the facility's approximate location, the names of General Thorne and his son, the official designation of Project Prometheus, and the horrific truth of their experiments on her and her brother. It was an incomplete story, a message in a bottle thrown into a vast, dark ocean, but it was a start, it was proof. She addressed the package to an independent journalist she'd once seen on a late-night news show, a woman known for her relentless pursuit of government overreach. It was a long shot, but it was the only one she had. Her phone, a cheap burner she'd bought at a convenience store, lay on the nightstand next to a faded, wallet-worn photograph of her and Liam. It was from years ago, at a county fair. They were both smiling, squinting into the sun, a giant stuffed animal clutched between them. It was a picture from another life, a life of simple problems and mundane joys, a life that had been stolen from her. She was no longer just a paramedic. That woman had died in the sterile white rooms of Project Prometheus. She was a fugitive now, hunted by a shadowy organization with limitless resources and a vested interest in her silence. She was terrified, isolated, and utterly alone. But looking at the picture of her brother's smiling face, she felt the fear recede, replaced once again by that cold, hard resolve. They had made her a monster's unwilling miracle. They had tried to turn her into a weapon. They had failed. She was a weapon now, but one of her own making, and she was aimed directly at them. Her fight was no longer just for her own freedom, but to expose the truth and, against all odds, to get her brother back. The journey would be perilous, but as she sealed the package and walked out into the anonymous darkness of the night, Alara Vance knew one thing with absolute certainty: the war had just begun.